In American history, we have had 45 presidents. Some of them good, some of them not so good, and some of them were even great. But arguably no president represented the American middle class better than President Eisenhower. Because Eisenhower fully embraced the United States heading into the modern age of the 20th century, like the majority of Americans. Beginning his first term in 1953, only 7.5 years after the end of World War II, Eisenhower seemed to continue an American tradition of presidents being elected for their efforts towards victory in major wars. Like General Washington, Eisenhower faced a humiliating defeat in his first battle, whilst fighting German General Erwin Rommel at the Battle of Kosran Pass in North Africa. Quickly thereafter, Eisenhower improved his strategy, and the American army under his command functioned cohesively to win battles in North Africa for what was known as Operation Torch, which then led him to commanding the defeat of Italy at Sicily in what was known as Operation Husky. Eisenhower then went on to make D-Day the success that changed the tide of World War II. Strongly advocating for bombing of French railways, and making sure that Gauss's decision to launch D-Day was in the small window of time for perfect weather, Eisenhower took every precaution to make the battle a success. Proving himself to be the inspirational leader that could lead the nation several years later, his speech to the soldiers said,
"Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking."
Along with his impressive military experience, many voters were attracted to Eisenhower's warm and sincere persona and his appeal towards middle-class families. Television had become widely popular in the years since the war, so Eisenhower utilized television to hone in on his likability to get elected.
Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington.
Only 6 months after his inauguration, Eisenhower had fulfilled a major campaign promise to visit the Korean Peninsula, and he successfully brought an end to the Korean War on July 27, 1953. The stakes of the Cold War and the fear of the Soviet Union's influence and anti-communist hysteria had affected American politics through McCarthyism, which Eisenhower had failed to stop, but he had also prevented from damaging the Republican Party further. In domestic policies, after seeing the deteriorating state of the nation's roads, Eisenhower passed the Federal Highway Act of 1956, setting forth the biggest public works project in our nation's history, spanning 48,191 miles across the entire country, costing $27 billion overall. As cars became a major facet of American culture, the easier accessibility of high-speed roads made it an integral part of daily life. Eisenhower's second term was more controversial because his weak stance on racial segregation caused him to face criticism for activists for not doing enough to help. However, Eisenhower sent 1,000 federal troops to Little Rock to enforce integration within schools, even if it simply was to follow a Supreme Court ruling. He did hold general distaste for racial segregation, signing the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which aimed to ensure that all African Americans could exercise their right to vote. Racial tensions were becoming a domestic issue that Eisenhower needed to further address in 1957, but then in the same year, Russia successfully launched Sputnik, which caused Eisenhower to respond by founding the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, otherwise known as NASA, which began the space race, spanning for over a decade. Despite his shortcomings, mistakes, and controversies, President Eisenhower was very popular towards the end of his presidency. Much of the peace and prosperity of the time was commonly attributed to Eisenhower's leadership. During his farewell address, the 34th president, and praised war hero, warned America of the destructive future the country would face by maintaining the military-industrial complex.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
So whether you love him or hate him, there's no question of Dwight D. Eisenhower's influence on not only American society, but the world.